My name is Marina Alvarez, and I'm 27 years old. The first time Teresa corrected the way I breathed, we were standing in her duplex kitchen under a brass chandelier that hummed like it had something to say. In this house, she said, folding a linen towel with military precision, we don't sigh at the stove. It spoils the food. She didn't look at me. She looked through me, like I was steam to be waved away. Evan laughed softly, the way men do when they think smoothing over a moment is love. She doesn't mean anything by it, he murmured, bumping my shoulder with his. Grandma's just traditional. Traditional looked like labeled shelves and a calendar that belonged to her alone. Even though our apartment was technically ours, it was the top floor of her duplex, her property, her air, her rules. She didn't knock when she came upstairs. She didn't need to. Family didn't require privacy, she said. Privacy was for people who were hiding something. I sanitized the pantry, she announced one morning, setting a spare key on the counter like a trophy. You're welcome. My herbs were gone. Basil, mint, thyme. They attract pests, Teresa added, and frivolity. William, her husband of 42 years, sat at the breakfast nook and studied the wood grain like it contained a secret map no one else could read. He had the look of a man who'd learned that keeping still was safer than being right. When our eyes met, he flinched. Then he smiled, small and apologetic, as if he knew he should have spoken decades ago and, having not, had lost the language for it. I told myself that love meant context. Evan had context. He was good and gentle and absent in the exact ways that made Teresa possible. He believed the world tilted a little toward women like her, women who carried an entire family name on their backs and hated the ache it left. When he introduced me to her, he'd bragged, Grandma runs events like generals run wars. No detail escapes her. I should have heard the warning in that last sentence. What do generals think of civilians? What do they make of love? Work became a scapegoat in our little ecosystem. I'm a dental hygienist, was anyway, and when Dr. Anderson promoted me to office manager with a raise I could feel in my bones, Teresa's smile went tight. Career women make terrible wives, she said to the chandelier. I wasn't a wife. I was someone's girlfriend who did the laundry on Tuesdays and liked her basil fresh. But Teresa talked like the future was an inevitable staircase I would climb into her arms. Lena never argued about family dinners, she told Evan later, in the doorway she didn't believe in. She understood tradition. Evan flushed. He didn't look at me. He looked at the kettle like it might boil him an answer. Lena was the ex-girlfriend who still lived in Teresa's stories like a saint. After that conversation, Teresa started scheduling mandatory family dinners precisely when I was on the schedule to close the office, or when the vendor reports were due, or when a patient had requested me because I made their anxiety smaller. If she misses again, mark my words, Teresa declared. To the downstairs air that somehow traveled upstairs, she's choosing work over family. I learned that with Teresa, choice was a weapon she held by the blade. When she took the apartment key, for safety, I stood my ground. That key is mine, I said, feeling my voice tremble and trying to love it anyway. Teresa placed a hand over her chest, theatrical. Family doesn't hide from family. The door stayed unlocked for her forever after. Money became another of her roads into us. Household budgeting is responsible, she told Evan, which sounded reasonable and therefore dangerous. My paychecks went into a joint account Evan and I supposedly managed, but Teresa reconciled. I stood in a drugstore aisle once, texting Evan for permission to buy the brand of pads that didn't hurt me. Teresa replied from his phone, Generic does the job. I bought what I needed with quarters from the car. I knew I was slipping out of myself when Mrs. Chen from across the hall asked, Are you all right? In a whisper that seemed to respect the building more than the people who lived in it. Mrs. Chen was the sort who noticed everything and kept a tidy ledger of injustice under her calm. Thin walls, she said softly, almost apologetically. Thick ears. She didn't elaborate. She didn't have to. Evan tried sometimes. He made tea and told me my hands were the best part of me because they knew how to be careful. But when Teresa corrected me, how to set the table, how to stack towels, how to say good morning, he went quiet. There was a boy in him who had learned that love was compliance, and I could not argue with a childhood I hadn't met. The brunch that should have been ordinary became an omen. I suggested a new recipe: Pinterest biscuits with cold butter and a whisper of honey. Teresa blinked, like I'd knocked over a church candle. "We've made biscuits the same way for 45 years, she said. Tradition is a promise. My mouth moved before my fear could stop it. Tradition is a door, I said. Sometimes it opens. Evan's fork clicked against his plate. He didn't look up. Later, when the promotion email came, regional coordinator, 38% raise, authority across 5 practices, I cried into the crook of my elbow for exactly 10 seconds, and then called my mother, who reminded me that women like us don't apologize for becoming the thing we promised ourselves we'd be. I put the Austin conference on my calendar and circled it 3 times. Teresa announced her 75th birthday dinner the next day. "The entire family will attend," she said to the chandelier that still hadn't said anything back. The date was the exact weekend of Austin. "I told you about this conference," I said, careful, like you speak to a person holding your past in their teeth. "This is a major professional opportunity." Teresa set down her coffee mug with a sound that felt like a cut. "Family first." Evan studied his plate again, like it might confess where courage hides. "Grandma's been planning this for months," he said. "We can celebrate Austin another time." "Austin is the celebration," I said. "It's the kind you build for yourself." The air in the duplex changed temperature. Teresa's voice rose without getting louder. "If you go to that conference, don't bother returning to my property." "Our apartment," I reminded her. "We pay rent." "On my deed," she answered, and I felt the legal truth under the cruelty. "You want independence? Be independent somewhere else." I looked at Evan one more time, one more chance. "Please." "I don't want to disappoint her," he said, and all the blood in my body took a step back from him. I went to Austin. I wore the black blazer that made me feel like a thesis and clicked through slides that felt like a rescue. 400 professionals listened, and I didn't stumble. When the offer came, regional coordinator, real, not aspirational, I said yes with a voice that had learned what it sounded like to belong to me. I flew back on a Thursday to a sky that looked like it had washed its face. Evan wasn't home. Teresa was waiting in the hallway outside our door with a box cutter in one hand and a stack of flattened cartons in the other. "I told you not to come back," she said, stepping into my space. "Your things are downstairs by the dumpster. I kept the dishes we bought before you." "That's illegal," I said, and I heard how small the word sounded in a place where law had always been a suggestion. "Where is Evan?" "Making a choice," Teresa said, and smiled the way people do when they think they are winning a game that no longer matters. I reached for my keys. She moved, quicker than a woman with a calendar that heavy should be. Her hand found my hair, and my scalp woke with pain so bright it felt like it had teeth. I stumbled, caught myself on the entry table, and tasted the copper of panic. "Respect," Teresa hissed. "You will learn it." Her arm pulled back. And then everything happened all at once. A door across the hall clicked open. Just a sliver. A phone's eye watched us from the darkness. William's footsteps pounded up the stairs, ragged with a kind of late courage. But the first hit landed before either rescue could. The chandelier finally spoke. It buzzed like a siren. Teresa's first swing didn't feel like a hand. It felt like a verdict. A sharp flash snapped across my temple, and the hallway folded inward. My shoulder clipped the entry table. Keys skittered beneath the radiator. The chandelier hummed louder, a nervous witness. "Respect," she breathed again, like a prayer with teeth. I grabbed the doorframe to steady the world. "Teresa, stop." My voice came out thin and stupid, like I'd borrowed it from someone gentler who didn't understand what had just entered the room. She yanked my hair, and the top of my skull lit up. The brass plate on the door blurred. Somewhere behind the wood, the building held its breath. The second blow sent me down. It wasn't cinematic. I didn't fall gracefully. My knee smacked the hardwood. Pain flared, bright and bright again. I curled by instinct, arms crossing my head the way we were taught when we practiced tornado drills as kids. She kicked once, twice, each a punctuation mark on a sermon she'd been preaching for decades. "This is my house," she hissed. "My kitchen. My name." Across the hall, the door's sliver widened. A phone lens watched. Mrs. Chen's whisper-thin voice threaded the air like a wire. "William, now." He appeared at the top of the stairs with the look of a man running into a fire he set by staying quiet too long. "Teresa!" His voice tore. For a moment, shock rearranged her face. William reached for her waist, not to restrain, but to separate, and she shoved him back with a strength that humiliated gravity. I tasted blood. It had that coin flavor I'd remember for months, the one that returns when you least expect it, even when you're sipping tea and trying to forget. I tried to speak, to insist on the obvious, "You're hurting me," but the words tripped over a wet place in my mouth and collapsed. Footsteps pounded. Doors thudded open on other floors. The building's heart remembered how to beat. Teresa lifted her foot again. I braced uselessly. William got it that time, his arms locked around her torso, and she fought like something old and feral, her breath ragged, her hairline damp, the smell of her perfume turning sour with rage. "Enough," William gasped. "Enough." Mrs. Chen's door closed to a sliver again. The phone lens didn't blink. A second later, I heard her voice down the stairwell, suddenly clear, multiplied by the echo. "I am calling the police. Ambulance 2, now." Teresa's chest heaved beneath William's grip. She stared at me, like I'd failed an exam I hadn't studied for because I hadn't known it existed. "You thought you could humiliate me," she said, too calm. "In my home." I shifted, and a shard of pain sliced along my ribs. The floorboards felt cold through my jeans. I found air in a small pocket and used it. I went to work. Each word cost something. "I chose myself." Her mouth tightened. "Exactly. Sirens were far at first, tiny threads weaving toward us, and then they were a fabric, loud and inevitable, flooding the hallway with blue." William loosened his hold and she stilled, the way snakes do when they hear boots. Evan arrived before the paramedics did, somehow, breathless and gray around the edges, his keys rattling in his hands like he'd been shaking for blocks. He stopped in the doorway, as if he'd run into a wall no architect had planned. His eyes went to Teresa first, inventorying, checking, and only then to me on the floor, curled, not crying, because crying required a jaw that still understood how to open. "Marina," he whispered, as if not to wake something. He bent to touch me, and I flinched so hard it looked like rejection. It was reflex. He pulled back, stung, then forced a smile at Teresa the way little boys do when they've memorized a script. "Grandma, what happened?" "She attacked me," Teresa said. The words were so smooth it almost didn't register as a lie. "She came back here defiant and ungrateful, pushing past me. I defended myself." William's breath snagged. "No," he said. One word, the first step onto a different life. The stairwell filled with uniforms. A paramedic knelt beside me, a woman with steady hands, and the kind of face that told you she'd seen worse and still believed people could be all right. "I'm Danny," she said. "We're going to take care of you, okay?" I nodded without nodding, grateful she addressed me and not my injuries. "Any allergies?" I tried to answer. When my jaw moved, pain detonated. Danny read it on my face, glanced at the swelling already blooming along the line of my cheek. "Don't try," she said gently. "You don't need to talk right now." They slid a board under me, braced my neck, did all the choreography you practice for moments like this. Teresa stood statue still, not a hair out of place except for the flyaway's rage had freed. Evan hovered at her shoulder like a shadow you couldn't shake off in a haunted house. His voice faltered. "Grandma, this looks—" He looked at me again, like he was searching my face for the version of myself who still made his tea and laughed at his terrible movie references. He looked for a map back. There wasn't one. On the landing, Mrs. Chen watched through that sliver, her phone held low. Our eyes met for an instant. She nodded once. The nod contained a promise. I saw. I recorded. I won't let your pain be debated to death. As they lifted the gurney, my shoulder screamed. I swallowed it. The stairwell stretched out like a tunnel to a place I hadn't intended to visit tonight. Teresa's voice followed me down, dignified and cool, a woman desperately sewing a story she could live with. "Such a hysterical girl," she told the nearest officer. "No respect at all." Outside, late Thursday Chicago air slapped my face awake. Someone had cleared a corridor to the ambulance. Blue light washed over faces I didn't know. The world had come to the window to watch. Danny's partner, a man with kind eyes and a tired jaw, counted softly to 3. The stretcher locked in with a satisfying click. Evan appeared at the rear doors, hands gripping the frame. "I'll ride with—" Danny took one look at his eyes, at the way they kept flicking back to Teresa for permission, and shook her head. "There can only be one, and she has to stay calm." She met my gaze. "Do you want him in there?" The question landed with mercy I hadn't expected. I tried to say no. What came out was an unlovely sound. Danny understood anyway. The door shut gently. Inside the ambulance, all the lights felt like they'd been chosen by someone trying not to scare a child. Danny checked my airway again, asked me to squeeze her fingers if I could hear her. I squeezed. She adjusted an IV with the quiet confidence of a person who knows where all the exits are. "You're doing great," she said, which was a lie and a kindness, and I needed it. The siren snapped on and the city parted. I watched the ceiling and thought absurdly of the chandelier, still humming, still hanging, still pretending to be a moon. I wondered if William would sleep under it tonight or take it down as an act of contrition. Pain sharpened, then softened at the edges, a blur I could almost lean on. I tried counting breaths, 4 in, 6 out, but my chest resisted anything that suggested order. I pictured Austin. 400 faces, the quiet thunder of applause, the way Dr. Anderson hugged me without ceremony. I pictured the email with the offer, the subject line bright as a small sun. I clung to that light while the city slipped by. We hit a stretch of smooth road, and for a moment I was outside of it, hovering. A thought came clear as a bell. This ends now. Not the pain, that would stick, stubborn, but the grammar of my life. The clause where I made myself smaller. The run-on sentence of excuses. The passive voice. The ambulance braked. The back doors swung open onto a fluorescent universe. The ER swallowed sound and replaced it with ordered chaos, runners in scrubs, the squeak of shoes, the coded language of urgency that pretends not to be afraid. They rolled me forward. White tile blurred under the stretcher like a deck of cards flipping. On the threshold, half in shadow, I saw them. Evan and Teresa, framed in the automatic doors, their silhouettes lit blue by the ambulance wash. Evan's hands were empty. Teresa's chin was up. William stood 6 paces behind them, as if he'd finally figured out the right distance from which to watch a woman's reign end. Danny's voice cut through. Jaw significant. Possible bilateral fracture. Ribs tender. Guarding. Suspected break. LOC negative. Patient responsive. Compromised speech due to pain. A doctor with careful eyes leaned into my field of view. "We've got you," he said, and this time it sounded less like a promise and more like a plan. He asked me my name and I mouthed it. He asked my age and I mouthed that too. "Any chance you're pregnant?" he asked, routine and neutral, and the absurdity of the question flickered through me like static. I shook my head. They pivoted the gurney and a curtain snapped on its rail. The room shrank to people who meant well. Someone pressed something cold to my cheekbone and the pain retreated a 1/4 inch, then another. Outside the curtain, voices rose. Teresa's traveled the farthest. Self-defense, hysterical, disrespectful. Words braided into a rope she'd pulled for years. Another voice, thin but steady, threaded through. Williams. I couldn't make out the sentences, only the spine of them. No, I saw. Enough. A security guard cleared a throat. The doctor lifted his chin toward the sound, then back to me. "We're going to take images and stabilize your jaw," he said. "We'll talk after." The curtain rustled. Air shifted. The ER doors, behind me now, sighed as someone important, or inevitable, entered. The world became muffled cotton. When I woke again, everything hurt in the wrong order. My ribs ached before my jaw, my throat before my head. I tried to swallow, but something inside me protested, a stretch of pain, tight and unyielding. A nurse's voice drifted in. "She's awake. Don't move yet, sweetheart." I blinked up at a ceiling, too white to be trusted. Machines hummed in rhythm, punctuated by the soft click of an IV pump. I reached up automatically to touch my face, but a brace and bandages made the gesture impossible. My fingertips met metal, wires. My jaw was wired shut. The memory slammed back in pieces, Teresa's eyes, the table corner, the chandelier's hum. My hands trembled uncontrollably. A soft voice came closer. Danny again, the paramedic turned guardian. "You're safe. You're at St. Luke's Hospital." Safe. The word didn't quite fit yet. Through the blur, I saw a doctor's white coat. "Ms. Alvarez," he said gently, "you're stable. You've suffered a double mandibular fracture, cracked ribs, and a mild concussion. We had to wire your jaw to heal properly. You'll be on liquid nutrition for a while." Liquid nutrition. The word sounded like punishment. He continued carefully. The police have been notified. It's procedure for injuries of this severity. My eyes stung. I nodded once, slow. The curtain parted. Teresa's voice arrived first. I want to see her. Sharp, commanding, like she was demanding an audience, not a reckoning. Evan trailed behind her, face drained, shoulders slumped as if the air itself were scolding him. William hovered several feet back, eyes red, hands clenched into trembling fists. The doctor turned, his tone crisp. Ma'am, only family. I am family, Teresa snapped, stepping past him. My grandson's girlfriend needs to understand how easily misunderstandings can ruin lives. My pulse jumped. I couldn't speak, not with the wires, but my eyes must have said enough. Evan took a hesitant step forward. Marina, he whispered, voice breaking. I didn't know Grandma would... The words disintegrated in his throat. I stared at him, searching for even 1 ounce of the man who used to believe in me, who once called my laugh home. All I saw was cowardice wrapped in guilt. Teresa folded her arms, chin lifted. You provoked me, Marina. You came into my house and disrespected me. Don't act like the victim now. Victim. The word hit me harder than her fists had. My breath caught behind the wires. Danny's hand rested on my shoulder, firm, grounding. Ma'am, she said to Teresa, I need you to lower your voice. Teresa ignored her completely. You've embarrassed this family enough with your dramatics. I warned you what would happen if... A low voice interrupted. Stop, William. The room stilled. Teresa froze mid-sentence, as if she'd heard a ghost speak. William's shoulders squared for the first time in years. I saw what you did, he said, voice raw but steady. You beat her unconscious, Teresa. You didn't defend yourself. You attacked. For a moment, disbelief cracked Teresa's face. You don't know what you saw. I know exactly what I saw, he said, louder now. I've been watching you destroy people for decades. You won't twist this. A police officer entered then, hat in hand, notebook ready. We received multiple calls, he began, scanning the room. His gaze landed on me, then on Teresa. Immaculate, not a mark on her. Ms. Alvarez, we'll need your statement as soon as possible. She can't talk, Danny said quickly. Her jaw's wired. Then I'll speak for her, Teresa announced. But William stepped in front of her, like a wall that had remembered it was meant to protect. No, officer, I'll speak. My wife assaulted this young woman without provocation, and we have proof. Teresa's head whipped toward him. What proof? She hissed. The answer came from the doorway. Mrs. Chen entered, quiet, precise, her phone held carefully in both hands. Video proof, she said softly. I recorded the whole thing from across the hall, and others before it. I was afraid this would happen. The officer raised an eyebrow. May I? Mrs. Chen nodded. The video played, the brutal sound of impact, my cry, William's shouting. The room seemed to tilt as the truth filled it. The officer's face hardened. Ma'am, he said to Teresa, I'm placing you under arrest for aggravated assault. Teresa's composure shattered. This is absurd. She attacked me first. The officer gestured toward me, jaw wired, eyes swollen. She's barely conscious, ma'am. You have no injuries. When Teresa tried to argue again, he held up a hand. Step into the corridor, please. As they led her away, Teresa's voice echoed through the hall. Ungrateful girl, I did everything for you. Her heels clacked like punctuation marks on a confession she didn't know she'd written. Evan started to follow her, but William caught his sleeve. Stay, he said. You've done enough running after her for one lifetime. Evan's mouth opened, then closed again. He looked at me one last time. I looked back, unblinking. For once, he didn't find forgiveness waiting for him. The nurse adjusted my IV. Try to rest, she murmured. You're safe now. Safe. I wasn't sure that word meant what she thought it did, but it was something to reach for. Later, an officer returned for paperwork. I couldn't sign properly with my dominant hand in a sling, so I used my left, shaky and unfamiliar. Restraining order request sat bold on the top line. By evening, William came back holding a small thermos. Soup, he said quietly. Blended. I thought you might tolerate a little warmth. He looked smaller, older, but lighter somehow, like speaking truth had peeled away years of fear. I nodded slowly, gratitude heavy in my chest. He hesitated, then whispered, I'm filing for divorce tomorrow. 42 years is long enough to live afraid. When he left, I stared at the dark window. The city outside pulsed with life, indifferent but steady. My reflection was almost unrecognizable, jaw wired, eyes hollow, but there was something new in it too. Clarity. The kind that only comes when survival finally outweighs shame. Evan didn't come back that night. Not that night, not the next. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and quiet beginnings. Mrs. Chen visited briefly, pressing a card into my hand with the number of her niece, a lawyer who specialized in domestic violence cases. She met my eyes. "You have witnesses now," she said, "and the truth. That's stronger than fear." I couldn't answer, but I nodded. The gesture was small. It felt enormous. The following morning, the officer from before returned with a calm nod. "Teresa Henderson is officially in custody," he said. "She'll face arraignment tomorrow. You'll be contacted for victim statements." He hesitated, then added, "Her husband's testimony and your neighbor's video make this a very strong case." When he left, I closed my eyes. For the first time in months, I breathed without waiting for someone else to decide whether I deserved to. Pain healed slower than the bruises faded. 10 weeks with a wired jaw taught me patience, silence, and how to measure anger in teaspoons. Every morning, I blended breakfast, lunch, and dinner, soups, shakes, liquefied dignity. But each swallow was proof that I was still here, still mine. By the time the wires came off, Teresa had become headline material. Local event planner arrested for brutal assault on grandson's girlfriend. The story spread fast. First neighborhood gossip, then newsprint. Her company, Henderson Celebrations, lost clients by the hour. Nobody wanted the woman who broke someone's jaw planning their weddings. William's divorce filing hit next. 42 years of obedience reduced to a neat stack of papers that began, "Irreconcilable differences due to psychological and physical abuse." He'd attached a statement, "Silence is complicity." It made the local paper's opinion column, quoted under Courage at 70. Evan called once. I let it go to voicemail. His voice was tentative, almost apologetic. "Marina, I don't know where to start. Grandma, she's impossible now. Nothing I do is right. I miss you." He paused, the sound of him rubbing his forehead audible through the static. "She threw out my work boots because they looked ungentlemanly." For a moment, I almost pitied him. Then I remembered the night she'd thrown out me. I deleted the message. Mrs. Chen's niece, Clara, a soft-spoken lawyer with steel in her spine, helped me through depositions. Teresa's defense tried everything: self-defense, mental decline, provocation. But the evidence was undeniable. Mrs. Chen's video, William's journals documenting decades of emotional abuse, and the medical reports that read like a crime scene. The first court hearing drew a small crowd of reporters. Teresa entered wearing beige cashmere and indignation. Her chin never wavered, even as the prosecutor recited the list of injuries. When she caught sight of me, she smiled faintly, as if we were still playing a family game I'd forgotten the rules to. William sat 2 rows behind me. I could feel his guilt radiating like static. During recess, he leaned forward and whispered, "I should have stopped her years ago. I'm sorry you were the one who made me finally do it." I nodded. "You did stop her," I managed, voice low but solid. "That matters." After Teresa's bail, she showed up at my apartment building one night, pounding the door, voice cracked with fury. "You ruined my life," she screamed through the wood. "After everything I gave you." I dialed 911 with one hand and held the restraining order in the other like a shield. When the sirens approached, she ran, shouting, "You haven't won, Marina!" She was right, but not the way she meant. Winning wasn't about revenge. It was about breathing freely. Evan tried to play peacemaker again. "She's just scared," he said over the phone. "So was I answered. "But fear doesn't justify cruelty." He didn't reply. Within a month, Teresa's empire collapsed. Her company's social media accounts went silent, flooded with angry comments. Her church board quietly suggested she step down. Her so-called friends stopped returning calls. The society pages that once printed her charity galas now ran updates on her upcoming trial. Evan's reputation burned in the fallout. His coworkers whispered behind his back, calling him the assault lady's grandson. His biggest client pulled out of a deal, not wanting the scandal near their company logo. He packed up one night and left the duplex. William later told me he drove off without saying goodbye. When I returned to work, Dr. Anderson hugged me awkwardly but sincerely. "You don't owe anyone an explanation," he said. He'd held my position open, calling it a matter of principle. I poured myself into recovery and routine. My scar faded to a thin white line under my chin. Small, stubborn, permanent. I decided not to remove it. It was proof, not shame. Clara called one morning, excitement threading through her voice. The trial date's been moved up. Teresa's attorney asked for leniency, but the DA won't allow delay. We'll have closure sooner than expected. Closure. The word felt foreign. The night before trial, William stopped by with an envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. I'm moving to Arizona, it said. Starting over. I've rented a small apartment near a pottery studio. I plan to learn how to shape things that don't fight back. Tell the court the truth, Marina. She built her house on control. Now it's collapsing. Let it fall. I cried after reading it, not out of sadness, but relief that someone who had lived in Teresa's shadow had finally stepped into the sun. When the morning of the trial arrived, I walked into the courthouse alone. Reporters waited outside, cameras flashing. I didn't flinch. Behind me, Mrs. Chen caught my arm gently. Breathe, she whispered. She can't hurt you anymore. The truth already has. Inside, Teresa sat at the defendant's table, perfectly composed, lips painted the same crimson as the night she attacked me. Her eyes found mine. You destroyed our family, she mouthed. I sat straighter. No, I thought. You did. The trial moved faster than anyone predicted. Maybe because the evidence spoke louder than the people. Maybe because, for once, everyone in that courtroom could feel the difference between discipline and violence. Mrs. Chen's video played on the second morning. The sound filled the courtroom. The thud, the scream, the word respect barked like a curse. The jurors flinched. Teresa sat rigid, eyes narrowed, pretending she couldn't recognize herself in the footage. When it ended, silence thickened the room. Even the judge looked stunned. Then William took the stand. He held his notes like a confession. His voice shook at first, then steadied. I kept journals, he said. 40 years' worth. Every humiliation, every tantrum, every time she called cruelty correction. I should have stopped her long before Marina ever met her, but I didn't. And now I can't undo that silence. Teresa interrupted once, shouting that he was exaggerating, but her lawyer's hand on her arm silenced her. You could feel the air shift, control slipping from her for good. When my turn came, I stood carefully, my jaw still stiff but free of wire. The prosecutor asked gentle questions. I answered simply, plainly. I didn't embellish. I didn't need to. My face had done the talking long ago. She told me I had no place, I said. But I had one. I just stopped asking her permission to exist there. The verdict came after less than 2 hours of deliberation. Guilty, on all counts. Second-degree assault, aggravated harassment, criminal trespass. Teresa's lips parted, but no sound came out. The judge sentenced her to 6 years in state prison. As the bailiff approached, Teresa finally spoke, her voice raw, brittle. This is a mistake. I did everything for that girl. But no one answered. The handcuffs clicked, cold and final. The reporters outside wrote about a matriarch's downfall. They called it poetic justice. But justice wasn't poetic. It was quiet, administrative, necessary. William moved to Arizona just as he'd promised. Months later, I received a postcard. 2 clay mugs side by side, imperfect but whole. Learning how to build without breaking, he'd written. You inspired that. Evan disappeared completely. Last anyone heard, he was working under a different last name, somewhere in Colorado. The man who once couldn't choose between love and obedience now had neither. Teresa's company, Henderson Celebrations, was bought out by Carmen, a former employee she'd once underpaid and humiliated. Carmen renamed it Fresh Start Events and staffed it with women rebuilding after abuse. I sent flowers to the opening ceremony with a note that simply said, "Build kinder." 2 years later, Teresa applied for early release on good behavior. It was granted. But good behavior in a 6x8 cell didn't mean she had changed, just that the walls had learned how to contain her. She walked out into a world that no longer answered her calls. No house, no family, no company, no friends. Even the church she once commanded from the front pew turned her away politely. The duplex where she'd ruled for decades was gone, bought by a nonprofit and turned into a children's community center. I drove by once. The laughter spilling from its windows sounded like absolution. I kept my scar. The surgeon offered to fade it, but I refused. It was a thin reminder that I'd once survived someone else's idea of control. Then, one evening, nearly 3 years after it all began, I met Christopher. He wasn't grand or loud or trying to fix me. He just listened. When I told him about Teresa, about the trial, the nightmares, the slow climb back to normal, he didn't make promises. He just said, "Thank you for trusting me with that." It was the simplest thing anyone had ever said to me, and it felt like safety. Months later, I met his mother, a soft-spoken woman from Seattle who brought homemade cookies and asked, "Do you like lavender or chamomile tea?" I cried in her kitchen when I realized the question wasn't a test, just kindness. That's when I understood something Teresa never could. Respect isn't obedience. It's gentleness returned. Now, every year on the anniversary of the verdict, I blend a smoothie, old habit, and toast to the scar that saved me. Teresa will die somewhere far away, surrounded by the silence she once enforced on others. William will keep shaping clay until his hands forget how to tremble. Evan will keep running from a name that no longer protects him. And I've stopped running entirely. Sometimes the best revenge isn't fire or fury. It's peace. The kind you build quietly, one breath at a time, until the echoes of their cruelty can't reach you anymore. So tell me, have you ever watched someone destroy themselves trying to control everyone else? Because sometimes you don't have to lift a finger. You just let their own poison finish the work.